Welcome to Amazing Business Radio with best-selling author and customer service and business expert, Shep Hyken. Shep will talk with some of the smartest thinkers in business to help make you more successful in your professional and personal life. This is Amazing Business Radio with Shep Hyken.
Hello, everybody. It's Shep Hyken. We're back with another episode of Amazing Business Radio, and today we're going to be talking with Dr. Tim Currie, who is the CEO of Nova, which is a consultancy firm, but more importantly, he is the author of a book, Swift Trust, which is all about building trust with employees and specifically employees that work remotely. Now, I have a firm belief that what's happening on the inside of an organization with employees, and that doesn't mean they're working in an office, they could be working from their home or from anywhere. What's happening inside the organization is felt on the outside by customers. So we need to create the experience internally that's going to drive employees to want to engage and want to take care of customers. So we're going to be talking all about how to build that trust with employees and how to create the experience that gets employees to love where they're working for. Again, he specializes in the remote workforce, but I believe so much of what he shares in his book, Swift Trust, applies to just about any employee. Now, before we get started with the interview, quick announcement. If you've got an amazing customer service story that you would like to share, or you have a question that you'd like to ask me, just reach out to me on any of the social media channels. I am pretty much everywhere. If it is a question, please use the hashtag #AskShep, and I will answer the question right there on this show, or perhaps in my newsletter, which is the Shepherd Letter, which comes out every week, and you can subscribe at no charge by simply going to hyken.com, HYKEN.com. And while you're subscribing, check out my annual research. It's free. It won't cost you anything. Just click on it. It pops up, and it's a report filled with stats, facts, and findings about what customers want, love, and expect from the companies that they do business with. All right, let's jump into an interview with Dr. Tim Currie. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Shep. Great to be here.
I'm excited to talk about this topic because it's near and dear to my heart. I am a firm believer that what is happening inside of an organization, the way we treat our employees, is going to reflect on how customers are treated. Customers feel what's happening inside an organization, whether they know it or not. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the culture. Specifically, your new book, Swift Trust, is really a book about building trust with employees, and specifically, even more so, remote employees. In COVID, a lot of employees went remote. They were forced to do that. And many companies have struggled to get them to come back. And I'll argue that a company that has a great culture, whether it's remote or all in office, wins. But I think it's probably easier to do so if the company is in office, all in office. However, I'm relying upon you in the short time we're together to tell our audience just exactly how to go about building a culture that is remote and brings the same level of productivity that an internal, all in office experience would bring. How's that for setting it up, Tim?
That sounds like
you only have like 15, 20 minutes to do
that. It sounds like a great frame to the conversation. And I agree with you, right? We, like many organizations, are still struggling to some extent to bring people back into the office and to recapture sort of the culture, the dynamic, the interpersonal dynamics of the before times. Excuse me.
And before times, referring to COVID.
Before times, yes. When 60 to 70% of the world was in an office, right? We know, field service, sales, customer service sometimes within a larger organization would occasionally be remote. But they tended to orbit a regional office or a headquarters, somewhere where there was a hive of people that interacted on a daily basis, where things got done, where the corporate culture was created, where the identity was built, and what made that particular place a unique place to work to the extent it was, and where people built experiences with each other and a lot of interpersonal, trust and connections. And rebuilding that is hard, even for those organizations that are driving RTO. But building that remotely is particularly challenging. And I'll do what I can to relate the framework to try to do that in today's world.
Well, first, let's hit the Swift Trust book. Give us a
Sure.
short overview. And I think a lot of the information we're going to talk about today is coming from that book and your research.
Yeah, absolutely. So the title Swift Trust, what Swift Trust is a research term that I came across while I was doing my doctoral research, which was from the early days of global virtual teams. There was a lot of corporate sponsored research into what makes a virtual team work, as you might imagine, and they came up with this concept of Swift Trust, which is essentially a very provisional, shallow, transaction based trust relationship. So if you think about, I'm on a team with somebody from Brazil and India and Germany and Shanghai. Remember, this was in the before times, before COVID, right? When the offices were, people were generally in an office, in an office culture. I have all these people I interact with on a daily basis, but I'm on this remote team. And what I'm going to do with Swift Trust was the concept of, I'm going to assume that you're competent, reliable, and have good character, because we're going to be on this project together for 6 months. And until and unless you prove me otherwise, I'm not going to invest any more to learn more about you or to reveal myself in different ways, the traditional ways that we build trust over time. That's not available to me, really. So I'm just going to basically work on a somewhat surface level transactional basis. Now, that the core of that concept was that it was always time bound, right? And I had all the other people in the office, both my direct chain of command and my indirect relationships that was really the fabric of my work life. What I found in my research was that by and large, in purely remote work environments, people are applying Swift Trust indefinitely, right? They're saying, okay, I wake up in the morning, I have a cup of coffee, I take my kids to school, or I live my life, and I've compartmentalized my work life into some portion of my day. But it doesn't define who I am. It doesn't bring me necessarily a great amount of satisfaction beyond this transactional relationship I have with my employer and potentially my coworkers. And you know what? That's just fine. I get through the day, I do my job, nobody complains, and the world keeps revolving. And while many people would argue, and certainly many of my peers would actually argue, hey, that's a better reversal of what the world used to be, where most of my time was spent in an office or traveling to customer sites, and my work life or my home life was compartmentalized. And we could argue that that's certainly perhaps a benefit of remote work, but that level of Swift Trust or provisional trust doesn't tend to stand up to challenge. It doesn't help you through hard times. It doesn't help you build a corporate identity. It doesn't help make your organization a place where people want to work. And to your point, if everyone is thinking transactionally and provisionally about the job they do from day to day, what do they have left to care about the customer? What do they have left from an energy perspective to spend on the customer? And some do it, and there are organizations that are thriving, and there's certain attributes that they share, and there's reasons why they are. But by and large, the larger the organization, the worse job they're doing at trying to recreate an identity culture.
So it sounds to me like I would say Swift Trust in your first experience that you shared, which is where you're dealing with people on a team, you make good assumptions about them, you work together toward a goal, versus some remote employee that's out there just doing their job. I think Swift Trust moves to low trust. We trust them to get the work done. That's about it. And by the way, to your point, their identity is not their work, which, by the way, I think that's good. A lot of people, their work identity is really who they think they are. And I'd love to think that, and by the way, there's some people like myself where I've been doing this since I was a little kid, literally. Since I was 12 years old, I started learning about customer service and experience, not realizing what it was. When I got out of college and I realized, wow, this is really what I've been doing all my life. I love it. Very few people actually have that fortune, a good fortune. You might be one of those, given the fact that you're an entrepreneur, CEO of your own consultancy and that type of thing. Anyway, so I guess the question is, how do we get those, for lack of a better term, transactional? I'm going to call it an anti-Swift Trust employee. How do we get them to cross the line to where they feel great about where they're working, that the people who work with them feel great about them, and the culture's there that makes them want to take care of customers?
If we assume that let's assume for our discussion that we're talking about folks who are 100% remote, right? I think that build this. So let me first set this stage. There, in my research, I found two types of organizations that were primarily remote. One type is working on what I call borrowed trust or federated trust. There's a tight core of people that started, usually it's a smaller organization. There's a tight core of people that have been friends and colleagues for a decade, right? They can finish each other's sentences. They've built companies before. They've shared their experiences. They have really deep and tight bonds of trust in interpersonal relationships. And they operate in a very highly efficient basis because they don't have to worry about, like, they've already done this before together. And to the extent they can widen that circle and bring other remote employees into the culture that they kind of represent and emanate, they can be very successful in this environment. And I'll talk a little bit about, they're going to have some of these best practices are in play there. The larger segment of the organizations out there, whether they be like call them medium-sized organizations that are remote or larger organizations that are just globally and remote, and they're remote in an unintentional way. They're just like, this is just organizationally, we're just remote. They're struggling because, first of all, there's what I call the digital overlay, where there's in these larger organizations, they're taking the pre-war, the before times world, right? We'll just keep calling it that. When we were to some extent in an office, and they're trying to overlay that into a global virtual remote workforce. It doesn't work for a couple of reasons. One is because you're remote, you don't have all Microsoft did a study during the pandemic, and they interviewed 250,000 employees, and they said, are you productive working remotely? Are you highly productive working remotely? 87% of employees said they're highly productive in a remote work environment.
And the true answer was?
Well, only 12% of their managers said they were highly productive.
Okay.
So the answer is probably somewhere in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
but it reveals a big difference when you have frontline managers and senior executives and leaders that are used to working in that environment. They're used to being able to reach out and touch people and organize people and lead people, direct people in a very different way than you have to do remotely. What I found in my research was that the number one indicator of trust in leadership was online availability. Not necessarily that I can ask you a question and you'll be immediately available to me, but at 8 o'clock at night when I'm working, if I see your little green light on, I know you're working too, right? The next biggest factor that built trust in leadership was responsiveness, right? So now that I do see you're online and you're engaged. Are you responding to me, right? And then the third was how well leaders engaged in non-work related channels. So because the remote world gets very focused on task execution and tasks, that's why I think this productivity, we can talk about the productivity metrics, I think are kind of a mirage. The organizations that create, call them Slack channels, right? Or Teams channels, or somewhere in your collaboration platform, a space for people to engage that's not work related, not task related, right? You're sharing pictures of your family, you're taking trips, you're in the Swift, the Taylor Swift Swiftie channel. Like there are all sorts of different non-work related things that are replacing, in a way, they fill that gap of how people used to interact face to face in ways that weren't work related, right? Where you reveal parts of yourself, and whether it's your family, people had pictures of their family on their desks, right? Now people have pictures of family on the shelf behind them, assuming their cameras are on, right? People, engage in different channels. So leadership can say and do different things. Leadership used to be, you could work a room, right? You could have a presence in front of what they still call front of the room presence. Most of the transformational leaders I've had the privilege to work with were fantastic up at the podium or at the front of the room or on a whiteboard. Can't do that. That superpower has been taken away in many ways. You can replace it, and I'll talk about that.
Yep.
But
Let's do
now,
this. I
yeah,
want to talk about how a leader replaces that, because
yeah,
this is real important. I'm cutting you off for two reasons. Number one, we need
no
to take a
worries.
break, but number two, this is real powerful. One of the issues that came out of COVID was not so much how to get employees who are working remotely to become more productive, but there were people that specialized in new leadership training techniques
Yes,
because leaders had never been exposed to not being able to use your term, reach out and lead that way. So that's what I want to talk about when we come back. We're going to take a short break. We are talking with Dr. Tim Currie, the author of Swift Trust. Do not go away. We're coming right back. Shep Hyken here with an offer that won't cost you a cent. You may have heard me talk about my annual customer service and experience research. We've surveyed thousands of customers matching the U.S. Census for age, gender, ethnicity, and geography, and we find out what customers love, hate, and want in a customer experience. What's the number one customer experience that almost every customer desires? What makes them come back? What makes them leave? Why won't they fill out surveys? What do they think of AI? Well, these questions and more are answered in the research. You can download the full report by going to hyken.com and clicking on the research tab at the top. Like I said, it won't cost you a cent, but it may make you or save you thousands and thousands of dollars when you understand your customers' expectations. Again, the website is www.hyken.com.
You're listening to Amazing Business Radio with best-selling author and customer service and business expert, Shep Hyken.
We're back on Amazing Business Radio talking with Tim Currie, the author of Swift Trust. The book is available everywhere Amazon sells books and probably other places as well. All right, Tim.
absolutely.
So we're talking about this. I think I love this idea. I'm going to force you into this. We've been talking
Sure.
about employees working remotely, and I want to throw out this idea that you were just bringing up, and I want to get some meat into it. I want to get some takeaways. How does a leader who never gets to interact face to face, obvious other than on a screen, you can't
Sure.
reach out and shake their hand and give them a high five when they're doing a great job. How does this leader build that rapport and create that trust that makes an employee love working for the organization and be very productive?
It's two-pronged. It's a fantastic question, and it's a sincere challenge for leadership today. One is, we talked about those digital channels, those digital collaboration points. If you can authentically engage in those channels, you will create, there's a theory of leadership called followership. People will feel that you are sincere. You've authentically reached out. You've taken the time to understand the positionality of your employees. So the more that they can reveal more of themselves on a personal level in those digital channels is really important, because it's the closest thing to human touch we can find. The second way, which is perhaps a little controversial and a little more challenging, is you have to become an influencer to your own employee base. And what I mean by that is not a very surface level sort of YouTube influencer that's, opening,
We'll go. Let's do higher surface level TikTok.
yeah,
influence.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. Top tier, top shelf. But like, it's important for employees who are waking up every day in their homes, who are, opening up their laptop or their phone, and they're engaging in their work tasks every day, to know what the CEO or the leader, any person within, there's not just the CEO, but any leadership position, what are they doing that day? How are they engaging for the betterment of the company? What challenges, what insights can they share? If it's just, hey, I'm walking down, Broadway in New York City, I'm on my way to, to a conference. This is what I hope to achieve today. I hope everyone's having a great day. That type of but regular and constant engagement is how a leader recaptures the transformational sort of air or juice that they used to have when they could walk the halls, when they could be in the front of the room. And it's a nuanced tactic, certainly, because you don't want it to end up being too kind of played out, or appear too you're doing it just for the sake of doing it. It has to be
Right.
meaningful. It has
Has
to
to
be
be
meaningful.
genuine.
It has to be genuine and
Yep.
authentic. And the more that employees see that at every level, every level of leadership, the more they'll start to believe that you're walking the walk of what you talk all day in the digital channels. And the more you're engaging in those digital channels on a personal level, you're building that followership that can then become transformational.
Yep. I love that. We did something during COVID when everybody was forced to go remote. We called it,
Mm-hmm.
I assigned somebody the task of HR, not
Right.
human resource, humor resource. And every day at lunch, we would have lunch together and
Mm-hmm.
remotely together via,
Yes.
our remote channel that we use. And then we would, so somebody was assigned for the week. Every day they had to show a short video on YouTube that would make us all laugh together. And
That's awesome.
it was fun because you could start to see the personality and the you could tell a lot by a person's sense of humor. But like we had one person that every video was a cat video. And they were pretty funny, and it was just fun. So but to your point, we've got 2 employees on the other side of the world that work with us, and they're not
Mm-hmm.
just people that work remotely, they're on our team. We have
Right.
every day we have contact with them. I personally have weekly meetings with them, and we have a couple standing meetings based on projects we're working on throughout the week. And people say, how have you been able to keep these people for so long? Because many of them are transactional in nature. They're working for their money and they're moving on. And I believe, or working for their paycheck, I believe that what makes it work is that we care about them, where they care about us. And they feel like they're part of a team, not just out there doing the work.
Right. Right. It has to be that way if you want to build that culture. The research shows, not just my research, but industry research on organizational trust shows that employees that have strong interpersonal relationships and feel that they can feel vulnerable in a trusted organizational environment. They're more productive. They have more well-being. They have a greater sense of identity. These things are basics as far as corporate interpersonal psychology goes. And you have to if indeed you want to create that, these are the types of things you have to do, and you have engage in the shared work lunch hour, engage on I've taken meetings where everybody's got selfie sticks and we're on a walk, right? Get out and walk, get out of your home,
Sounds like
let's
fun.
exercise together,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the types of tactics that you have to do. What has been already proven in the short sample size we have is that 10 hours of back-to-back Zooms are not the way to build an innovative culture, not a way to build a place that people want to stay and be. And you got to do it differently.
Yeah.
I would also say there's one other topic I'd like to talk about. I don't know how much
Yeah.
time we have, but that's also it's the attention battle. And that's
Okay.
one that's pretty sincere.
Let's take a couple of minutes to do that before we jump into the final question.
Sure.
And I'll let you look at your watch so you can time yourself.
I think by and large, most remote workers have at least 3 sensory inputs going at all times. They have their laptop, they have a TV going, and they have their phone. And these are at least 2 more than they would have in a meeting that you would have face to face, and maybe 3 if we're in the days of, hey, I'm on the whiteboard and please close your laptop, right? There's an attention battle going on that corporate America has already lost. We all know that the algorithms work, and we know that people are constantly scrolling, and I'm even guilty of it sometimes. So if you're going to get a full work day out of somebody, it doesn't need to be continuing. We all know that remote workers can work at any time of the day. When you do need their attention, when you do need their engagement, you have to find a way to get people to turn their cameras on, to turn their phones off, and to commit to not having other sensory things going on when you truly need them engaged. And I think that might not be 8 hours of a day, certainly, but it might be 2, it might be 3, and that will make a difference both in how they perceive their role and their work internally, and by extension, the customer.
Yep. So really getting the focus is part of what creates your productivity. And I believe even if you're in an office environment. All you got to do is go back to that old cult movie, Office Space. I don't really think it matters whether you're a remote or in the office. Some people are
Doesn't.
just disengaged.
They're just disengaged. I wouldn't say I've been missing it, Bob.
That's great. All right, let's hit the final question. I want you to pull a nugget out of your book, something special out of the book that would apply not only to this idea of swift trust, building the culture, but if you can think about something that might be a positive impact on the customer at the same time.
Sure. I think finding ways to create intentional engagement. And I'll tell a very quick story. I was 20 years ago, right, on a consulting gig out in LA. And I was with two young consultants from my team who were from Montreal. And they wanted to experience authentic Mexican food. And they were going to go to Taco Bell. Now, I must say, Taco Bell's a fine establishment. I've nothing against Taco Bell.
I like Taco Bell, right?
I like Taco Bell, but it's not what people in LA would call authentic Mexican food. And there was a CI. This was one of those projects where we were there till 10 o'clock at night in a downtown LA office, skyscraper, 10 o'clock at night for 2 weeks at a time. We couldn't get the CIO to even make eye contact with us, right? But he kind of knew. He's like, oh, these guys are working. These guys are working. He stopped by one night. He says, you guys doing okay? I know you've been working really hard. I said, we have a real problem. And I'll query, he's all, why did I even stop by? I said, these guys, I gave him the whole story. I said, they're going to go to Taco Bell because that's what they think authentic Mexican is from LA. And he was like, well, we can't have that. So him and he got his assistant, and they printed out like maps to 3 different places in LA that that they would recommend going. We go to one that's was just north of downtown. It was an old house that had been turned into a restaurant. We get in line. There's the older ladies making the masa by hand, putting it on the hot stone, and are like, yeah, this is the right place. This is the right experience. We go in the next day. He couldn't so, how was it? How'd it go? I still talk to that guy, right? 25 years later, that's still a relationship I have. I still talk to those guys that were on my team, and they still tell that story, right? It doesn't have anything to do with how well we did the project. Well, we delivered it ahead of time, under budget, worked really hard. But those authentic relationships are the sinews of your customer relationship. They're the sinews of your professional experience, certainly as a consultant or as a salesperson. And if we don't find ways of recreating those somehow, because you can't plan that out. You've got to be together in the same place for those things to really happen. But if we don't find ways of doing those, either finding the excuse to do them in person or doing them digitally, we're going to lose something that we'll never recreate in the virtual world.
I love that. So leaders need to find moments that are either in person or remotely, if possible, to make the connection. And I'm going to make a big lofty goal here that 25 years later, people will still be talking about.
Absolutely.
Tim,
if you do that, then you've succeeded.
Yeah, there you go. Tim, that was a great story, a great way to end our interview today. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Been a pleasure, Shep. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, that wraps it up. Another episode of Amazing Business Radio. We'll be back next week with another interview. Until that time, this is Shep Hyken reminding you to always be amazing.